It all started with one message. "We need to talk. It's important." My heart sank when I saw those words on the screen. I did not know that this meeting would change everything. That the cruel truth would hit me in the heart. That the person I trusted the most would turn out to be the one who was hiding a knife from me. The city skyline was bathed in hues of amber and crimson as the sun dipped below the horizon. From his office on the 25th floor, Evan Carter stared blankly at the screen in front of him, the glow of his computer casting a dull light on his tired face. Numbers, emails, contracts, all blurred together. His mind wasn't in the office anymore. It hadn't been since that message arrived. A simple text. Short. Cryptic. "Evan, we need to talk. It's important." The sender. Tom Reynolds, his closest friend since college. They had been through everything together. Late-night study sessions, drunken bar fights, heartbreaks, and triumphs. Tom wasn't the type to be dramatic, so for him to send a message like this, it was serious. Evan's stomach twisted. He reached for his phone, rereading the message for the 5th time. Something about it unsettled him, a gnawing feeling in his gut that he couldn't shake. What the hell is going on, he thought. Less than an hour later, he was pulling into the parking lot of Valentino's, the Italian restaurant where he and Tom often met for drinks after work. It was one of those places that had just the right amount of class but not enough to be pretentious. Comfortable. Familiar. As Evan walked in, he immediately spotted Tom sitting at a quiet corner booth, fingers tapping restlessly against his glass of whiskey. His usual easygoing demeanor was gone. His face was tight, tense. Evan slid into the seat across from him. "Allericht, man, what's going on? You look like you've seen a ghost." Tom exhaled sharply, rubbing a hand over his face. "I don't even know how to say this, Evan." Evan's pulse quickened. "Just say it." Tom hesitated for a moment before finally meeting Evan's eyes. "I saw Kate today, at the Hilton Grand." Evan frowned, confusion flickering across his face. "Okay. She had meetings this week. That's where the firm booked her. What's the big deal?" Tom swallowed hard. "She wasn't in her room, Evan. She came out of someone else's." Silence stretched between them. Evan could hear the chatter of other diners, the clinking of glasses, the soft hum of music playing in the background. But it all felt distant, like he had been dropped into an alternate reality. "You're mistaken," Evan finally said, his voice eerily calm. "You must have seen someone else." Tom shook his head. "I wish I was wrong, man. I really do. But I saw her. Room 721. She stepped out, checked both sides of the hallway, then walked back to her room. 723. Evan's throat went dry. Kate, his wife, his partner for the last 6 years. The woman he had built a life with, shared dreams with, fought and made up with. The woman he trusted more than anyone else, was sneaking out of another man's hotel room. His hands curled into fists under the table. His breathing slowed, measured, controlled, though inside a storm was brewing. "Who?" he asked, his voice deadly quiet. Tom sighed. "I don't know. I only saw her, not him." But Evan, the way she moved, like she was making sure no one saw her, that wasn't innocent. Evan let out a slow breath. His mind raced, searching for explanations, excuses. Maybe it was work-related. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe she's lying to you. That thought hit him harder than he expected, because deep down, despite wanting to dismiss it, a part of him already knew. Things had been off. The long business trips, the late-night calls she always took in the other room, the sudden need to start going to conferences that were never on her calendar before. And now this. Evan felt his appetite disappear. He stared at the amber liquid in his glass, swirling it absent-mindedly. "I needed to tell you, man. I couldn't keep this from you," Tom said, watching him closely. "But what are you going to do?" Evan exhaled slowly, pressing his fingers against his temples. He didn't know yet, but he knew one thing for certain. He needed the truth. The doubt begins to fester. That night, Evan barely slept. He lay in bed, staring at the ceiling while Kate slept soundly beside him, her breathing even and peaceful. He turned his head, studying her face. The woman he loved, the woman who may have just shattered their entire life together. Had she always been this good at lying? At deception? How long had she been doing this? How many times had she come home, kissed him, looked him in the eyes, and pretended like everything was fine? By morning, Evan had a plan, He wasn't going to accuse her. Not yet. He needed more than a friend's word. He needed undeniable proof. He started small, checking their shared bank account, her credit card transactions, hotel stays. Everything seemed normal at first glance, but something caught his attention. A charge for a dinner at La Reverie, a high-end French restaurant. The date? The night she was supposed to be at a networking event in another city. She wasn't where she said she was. A knot formed in his stomach. Then there were the text messages. Kate was always careful, never leaving anything suspicious on her phone. But Evan was a patient man. That night, while she was in the shower, he did something he never thought he'd do. He unlocked her phone. At first, nothing, just normal conversations. Work, friends. But then, a name he didn't recognize. D. Scott. His pulse pounded as he opened the chat. D. Scott * can't stop thinking about last night. Kate * me either. Wish we had more time. * D. Scott * next trip. Same place? * Kate * of course. I'll make it work. * Evan felt his world tilt. There it was. The proof he needed. The truth in her own words. His hands clenched around the phone, his jaw tightening as a wave of fury crashed over him. He had wanted to believe her. Wanted to believe that Tom was wrong, that his fears were unfounded. But now there was no denying it. Kate was having an affair, and Evan Carter was about to make her regret every single lie she had ever told. Evan sat in his car, gripping the steering wheel so tightly that his knuckles turned white. The revelation from Kate's messages burned in his mind like a brand, searing through every rational thought. The woman he had loved, trusted, and built a life with was betraying him. And now he had proof. His first instinct was to confront her immediately, to throw the phone at her and demand an explanation. But what good would that do? She would deny, she would cry, and she would twist the truth in ways that would only leave him more confused, more broken. No, he needed a plan. A confrontation was inevitable, but not yet. Not until he had control. The next morning, Evan called in sick. He wasn't sick in the traditional sense, but the weight pressing on his chest felt heavier than any fever or cold. Instead of going to work, he spent the day digging deeper into Kate's lies. He started with the credit card statements. If she had been meeting someone in secret, there had to be a financial trail. And sure enough, there it was. Dinners at expensive restaurants. Boutique hôtel stay. Charges at upscale lingerie stores that he had never seen the results of. Each discovery sent a fresh wave of anger through him, but he forced himself to remain calm. The clearer the picture, the stronger his case when the time came. Then, he did something that made his stomach twist in knots. He followed her. Kate had told him she would be working late, preparing for an upcoming client meeting. But instead of going to her office, she drove straight to a small, dimly lit hotel on the outskirts of the city. Evan parked across the street, watching as she stepped out of her car, checked her surroundings, and entered the building. 15 minutes passed. Then 30. Finally, a man walked through the entrance, his posture relaxed, confident. Evan didn't need an introduction to know who he was. D. Scott. His hands clenched into fists as he watched the two of them disappear into the elevator together. The doors shut, sealing them away from sight, but Evan didn't need to see more. He already knew what was happening behind those closed doors. He exhaled slowly, gripping the steering wheel until his fingers ached. His rage threatened to consume him, but he wasn't going to do anything reckless. Not yet. Over the next few days, Evan worked meticulously. He compiled screenshots of Kate's messages. He printed out financial statements, highlighting every suspicious transaction. He took photos of her meeting Scott at the hotel. He even installed a small recording device in their living room, just in case she ever let something slip while talking on the phone. He was done being the fool. If Kate wanted to play games, he would make sure he played smarter. But what haunted him most was how normal she acted. Every morning, she kissed him goodbye as if nothing was wrong. Every evening, she asked about his day with that same warm smile he had fallen in love with years ago. How long had she been living this double life? How many times had she come home to him after being in another man's bed? Evan had never felt so disgusted, so betrayed. And yet, despite all the evidence, despite knowing that his marriage was already over, a part of him still hesitated. Not out of love for Kate, but out of something darker. Revenge. A week later, Evan finally set his plan into motion. He waited until Friday night, date night. The same tradition they had kept for years, only this time it was going to be different. He made dinner reservations at one of Kate's favorite restaurants. He dressed in the suit she loved, played the part of the doting husband one last time. She didn't suspect a thing as they drove downtown, chatting idly about work and weekend plans. The restaurant was dimly lit, intimate, a perfect setting for what was about to unfold. Evan waited until they had ordered, until the wine was poured and Kate was relaxed. Then he reached into his pocket and slid his phone across the table. "What's this?" she asked, picking it up. "Go ahead," he said, his voice unnervingly calm. "Read it." Kate frowned, but did as he said. Her expression shifted almost immediately, from confusion to shock to pure, unfiltered panic. The messages were right there on the screen. Every text between her and Scott. Every lie. Every promise she had made to another man while still wearing Evan's ring. Her breath hitched. "Evan, don't." He cut her off, leaning forward. "Don't insult me with another lie. I know everything, Kate. The messages. The hotels. The money you spent on him. The nights you told me you were working late while you were fucking another man." Kate's eyes welled with tears. "It's not." "Not what?" Evan's voice was sharp, venomous. "Not what it looks like. Because from where I'm sitting, it looks pretty damn clear." She swallowed hard, hands shaking. "Evan, I love you. Please, let me explain." He laughed, a hollow, humorless sound. "Love? Don't you dare use that word. You don't love me. You love the thrill, the secrecy. You love knowing you could have both a husband and a lover without consequences. Well, guess what? There are consequences." Kate reached across the table, but Evan pulled his hands back. He wasn't going to let her touch him. Not anymore. "Evan, I'm sorry," she whispered, voice cracking. "No, you're not," he said. "You're sorry you got caught." Silence settled between them, heavy and suffocating. Kate wiped at her tears, looking at him with something almost like desperation. "What happens now?" she finally asked, voice small. Evan picked up his glass of wine, took a slow sip, and set it back down. Then he smiled. Now we're done." Evan didn't go home that night. He had already packed a bag, booked a hotel. By the time Kate got back to their house, she would find divorce papers waiting for her. He had taken his name off their joint accounts, canceled her credit cards. He wasn't giving her the chance to screw him over again. He had spent years loving her, trusting her, and now he was free. Kate called. He didn't answer. She texted. He didn't respond. For the first time in a long time, Evan Carter was done playing the fool. And it felt damn good. The night was silent except for the occasional hum of a passing car. Evan sat in his hotel room, staring at the city lights, feeling a strange mix of emptiness and satisfaction. He had done it. The confrontation, the reveal, the complete destruction of Kate's web of lies. It was all over. But the emptiness gnawed at him, whispering that this wasn't truly the end. Kate had betrayed him, and now she was going to face the consequences. But was simply leaving her enough? Was watching her life crumble from a distance going to bring him closure? No, not yet. By morning, Evan had turned off his phone, needing space from the flood of messages. Kate had called him 22 times, sent over 50 messages, each one more desperate than the last. He didn't need to read them to know what they said. Apologies, excuses, pleas for another chance. He wasn't interested in any of it. Instead, he focused on his next steps. The divorce process had already started, but Evan wasn't just going to let her walk away unscathed. She had humiliated him, lied to him, made a fool of him. Now it was his turn to take control. First, he sent an email to her law firm senior partners. A professional, polite inquiry regarding their policy on workplace relationships, specifically between senior associates and junior colleagues. He knew exactly how damaging this could be for her career, and he wasn't going to let her escape without facing the fallout. Next, he reached out to Scott's fiancée. Yes, the man Kate had been seeing was engaged. Evan had done his research. He had all the proof he needed to blow their perfect little world apart. A simple message, a few screenshots, and just like that, Scott's life was about to collapse, just as Evan's had. Evan knew it was only a matter of time before Kate found him. She wasn't the type to give up so easily. And he was right. That evening, as he returned to his hotel room, he found her waiting in the lobby. She looked exhausted, hair disheveled, dark circles under her eyes. "Evan, please," she said, her voice raw. "Just talk to me." He considered walking past her, ignoring her, but something in him wanted to hear what she had to say, if only to watch her squirm. "You have 5 minutes," he said coolly, leading her to a quiet corner. She inhaled sharply, trying to compose herself. "I know I hurt you. I was stupid, reckless. But I swear it didn't mean anything. I never wanted to lose you." Evan leaned forward, his voice calm but deadly. "You didn't lose me, Kate. You threw me away. You made your choices. And now you get to live with them." Tears welled in her eyes. "I'll do anything to fix this. Please, Evan. We can go to therapy. We can start over." He laughed, shaking his head. "You don't get it, do you? There's nothing to fix. You're only sorry because you got caught. And I'm done letting you manipulate me." She reached for his hand, but he pulled away. "Goodbye, Kate." And with that, he walked away, leaving her in the past where she belonged. The next morning, Evan received a text from Tom. Asterisk, "You won't believe this. Check the news." Asterisk. Curious, Evan pulled up the local business reports. He smirked. The consequences of Kate's actions were catching up with her. And Scott? His engagement had imploded overnight. Evan didn't feel guilt, only a sense of justice. For the first time in weeks, he felt truly free. And he was just getting started. Evan had never felt so in control. The chaos that had once ruled his life had finally settled. And for the first time in weeks, he felt like he could breathe. Watching Kate and Scott's downfall unfold had been satisfying. But now, it was time to move forward. Not in anger, not in revenge, but in rebuilding himself from the ground up. A week after the scandal broke, Kate tried once again to reach out. This time, it was through a long-winded email, filled with desperate apologies and justifications. Evan didn't even bother to finish reading it. He simply forwarded it to his attorney with a short message. Finalize everything as soon as possible. He wasn't going to entertain her anymore. There was no point in holding on to the past. Instead, he poured himself into work, into the gym, into reconnecting with old friends. He booked a trip, something he and Kate had always talked about, but never actually done. A solo getaway to Rome, where he could walk the cobbled streets, drink espresso in the sun, and lose himself in a world far removed from the wreckage of his marriage. 2 days before his trip, he ran into Scott. It was sheer coincidence. Evan had just left a cafe when he saw the man who had played such a significant role in his destruction. Scott looked disheveled, a far cry from the confident, arrogant figure Evan had imagined. His engagement was over. His career was hanging by a thread. He had lost everything. Scott noticed him and, for a moment, looked like he wanted to turn away. But he didn't. He stepped closer, swallowing hard. "Evan," Scott said, voice hoarse. I know I have no right to ask for anything, but I just want you to know that I never meant for any of this to happen." Evan stared at him, expression unreadable. "You never meant to get caught." Scott exhaled, nodding. "Yeah, that too." For a moment, Evan considered what to say. The truth was he didn't care about Scott's remorse. He didn't care about his suffering. He only cared that justice had been served. "I don't need an apology," Evan finally said. "What's done is done. Now you have to live with it. Just like Kate." Scott nodded solemnly. "Ido. And I will." Evan gave him one last look before walking away. He didn't need revenge anymore. The past had been burned to the ground. Now it was time to build something new. Boarding his flight to Rome, Evan looked out over the city he was leaving behind. The pain, the betrayal, the anger, it had all shaped him, but it would not define him. He was free. And for the first time in his life, that was enough. Evan touched down in Rome just as the sun began to set over the ancient city, casting golden hues across the skyline. The weight of the past weeks had not fully lifted, but here, thousands of miles away from the wreckage of his old life, he felt something he hadn't in a long time: possibility. The first few days were spent in solitude. He wandered through the Colosseum, stood in awe of the Vatican, and let the sounds of the bustling streets wash over him. Each morning, he sat in a small cafe near the Trevi Fountain, sipping espresso and journaling. It had been years since he wrote anything meaningful. Somewhere between marriage and work, he had lost the habit. But now, words poured from him, reflections on betrayal, pain, resilience, and hope. He didn't know if he was writing for himself or for some future version of him that might look back and smile at how far he had come. One evening, as he sat alone at a quiet restaurant in Trastevere, he met her. Sophia. She wasn't flashy or trying to catch attention. She was simply there, reading a book, sipping her wine, existing with a quiet confidence that intrigued him. It was she who spoke first, noticing his American accent when he ordered another glass of wine. "You're not from here." He smiled for what felt like the first time in ages. "Is it that obvious?" "Only a little," she teased, closing her book. "First time in Rome?" "First time alone," he admitted, surprising even himself with his honesty. Sophia tilted her head. "And how does it feel?" Evan exhaled, gazing at the flickering candle between them. "Like I'm finally breathing again." Over the next week, they crossed paths more than once. Sometimes by accident, sometimes because they both chose the same places at the same time. Conversations turned into late-night walks, into shared laughter over bad tourist traps, into quiet confessions over wine. Sophia never pried into his past, and that was what made her presence so refreshing. She didn't see him as the man who had been cheated on or the man who had sought revenge. She saw him as he was in that moment, someone who was learning how to live again. One night, as they sat on the Spanish steps, she turned to him. "You don't know your past anything, you know. You can just be." Her words settled deep within him. He had spent so long holding on to what had happened, planning every step to regain control. But maybe Sophia was right. Maybe the future wasn't about control. Maybe it was about choice. His choice. By the time his flight back to the States arrived, Evan was no longer the same man who had landed in Rome. He wasn't fully healed, and he knew that healing wasn't linear. But he was no longer defined by the scars of betrayal. As the plane ascended, he opened his journal to a fresh page and wrote 3 simple words. And for the first time, that was enough.